Next, we want to address the issue of volunteerism. Those of you who took Next, we want to address the issue of volunteerism. Those of you who took the survey no doubt remember the statement that read 10% of our people do 90% of the work. 43% of all of those who took the survey agreed with that statement. In addition to that, looking at the comments and all on the survey and listening in the focus groups, the issue of needing more volunteers was a theme. It was just kind of a drumbeat. One of the things we'll observe is that you're doing some of the right things in terms of working with volunteers and discovering new volunteers, but you do not have a system for enlisting people into service, into ministry, and into leadership. Very clearly, there is a need for more volunteers. Let me illustrate that. On the 14th of August, on the Crossroads campus, you had 158 people there, 33 of whom were children, 125 of whom were adults. On the Deer Meadow campus that same Sunday, August 14th, you had 48 children and 126 adults for a total of 174. When you calculate out the ratio of adults to children, you'll see that that was 3.1 adult per child in attendance at Bethel on that Sunday. This is a very low ratio. Most churches have significantly more adults than children at this point. But then when you look at August 21st, which was, I think, a Sunday where you were all together, one service at Deer Meadow School, you had 109 children present and 256 adults, total of 365 people. And the ratio of children to adults on that Sunday was 2.3 adults per child. So you had just slightly more than twice the number of adults than you have children. This is untenable in that we're only talking about one aspect of the ministry of the church, and that's children. And the reality is that you need to have a much larger pool of adults from which to draw in order to have enough children's ministry workers for the ministry of the church. Now, there's a reason for that, and if you, in the next slide, you'll see the age demographics, and you'll notice that the church is significantly underrepresented in 45 to 50 year-olds, 54-year-olds. Now, why this is significant is that this is kind of in the heart of the age demographic in a church that provides the pool of worker bees. Generally speaking, in most churches, from about 35 to about 55 are the peak years or the peak period of time during which adults volunteer for very significant positions of ministry. Prior to 35, children are young families, all kinds of activities. And then once they get beyond 55, empty nest, begin to travel a little bit more, and sometimes will give up key and significant leadership responsibilities at that time. So in any church, your primary pool for drawing ministry leaders and workers, not just for children's ministry, but for really all of the ministries, are the adults who are roughly 35 to 55 years of age, and you are significantly um, um, lacking in that particular demographic in your church. So the reality is that the struggle that you're having to find enough volunteers is not a bad people problem. It's not. It's not you just got a whole bunch of people that aren't committed, a whole bunch of people that aren't serving. You have some very understandable reasons why you are struggling to find the volunteers that you need. Now, having said that, however, there's some other data that is very significant. You remember perhaps the statement on the survey, I am giving back to the church body at least as much as I am receiving from the church body. The mean score on that was 3.4, which is in the just okay range. Another statement, I feel the church is using my potential to the fullest. The mean score for that was 2.9, which is in the cause for concern range. And then the third statement of significance that we want to point out is the one, I am involved in those areas of ministry that best correspond with my areas of giftedness. And the mean score on that was at 3.0, clearly needs work. And so the reality is that there are a significant number of people at Bethel who feel like they maybe should be giving more. They appreciate what they're receiving from the church, but maybe have that sense that they should be giving more back into the life of the church and ministry of the church. You have a very significant number of people who feel like they've got more potential, they've got more to give than is being asked of them at this particular time. It doesn't necessarily mean more time, but the potential for their serving in some significant way and giving time for a ministry and a leadership role that really matches who they are. They're saying, wow, I'm just not being used to the fullest of my potential. And then another issue is that you have, again, a significant number of the people who are saying, I'm not being asked to work in the area that really corresponds closest to my area of expertise and my area of giftedness. And all of this points to really a systems issue and a systems problem when it comes to your volunteer problem. And so that leads us to prescription number 2, and that is to develop and implement a comprehensive system for raising up ministry workers and leaders no later than June 1, 2017. The next area that we want to talk with you about is care, connectedness, and community. The first thing I want to do is just a little teaching here. You want to be very careful in your church to always talk about congregational care, not pastoral care. In a lot of churches, they talk about pastoral care when it comes to the care of the people. And the problem in calling it pastoral care is that, first of all, the way the word and that phrase is typically used in most churches, it has absolutely nothing to do with caring for the pastor or the pastors. Secondly, the second problem is that if it's pastoral care, then whose job is it? Well, of course, it's the pastor's job because it's pastoral care. And that's not the biblical model. The biblical model is that the people of the body, the people of the church, care for one another. There's about 74 one another passages in the New Testament, over and over and over again. Just a continuing theme is that the people of the church minister to one another. Now, the pastor and the staff have certainly roles to play in terms of care, connectedness, and community, but it is really up to the people of the church to care for one another primarily. And when you stop and think about it, it just makes a huge amount of sense because the fact of the matter is, if even at your size now, and if you continue to grow, if you're expecting this handful of people called the pastor and staff and all to care for everybody, then a lot of people are going to just be slipping through the cracks because it's not feasible. for a small number of people to be caring for an increasingly large number of people. So the reality is that in the future at Bethel, care, connectedness, and community must look very, very different from how it's looked in the past. And I can tell you right now that one of the key pieces to that and addressing that need is through your grow groups, because the only sustainable way to provide care for a growing number of people in a church is through your small group ministry. But then there's also the need to provide care through a care team, because in part there's some people that aren't in small groups, never will be for a variety of reasons. So in addition to your grow groups providing care and connectedness and community, there needs to be a care team as part of your addressing this piece. And the reality, though, is that care, connectedness, and community must be provided. So it leads us then to prescription number 3. Further develop, strengthen, and create the means to address the need for care, connectedness, and community. And we've listed out here what the component parts of that will be. Your assimilation process, small groups, as we've already mentioned, the care team, and some tactics that contribute, such as all church events, cross-campus communication, a variety of things like that. And we're setting as a target date for addressing this and having a system in place for March 15th of 2017. The next issue is communication. And the reality is that all churches complain about communication. Every single assessment we do, there's just always a number of people that are complaining, sometimes very bitterly, about the communication, or more frequently what they consider to be the lack of communication, and oftentimes it's a very real lack of communication in the church. The truth of the matter is, however, that even though it's a sticky point in a lot of churches, the reality is that it's not very often such an important issue and negatively impacting the life of the church to the degree where we would have a prescription about communication. However, at Bethel, it's our belief that communication requires priority attention. When you look again at your survey responses, communication between leaders in the congregation is excellent. That statement had a mean score of 3.1, which is in the clearly needs work category. Communication about youth programs and events is timely and effective. 3.0, clearly needs work. And I know you've had a change in your youth leadership of your youth ministry. And that may change dramatically here very quickly, but at least at the time of the assessment and the survey, that was a real felt need and issue. Then we have I'm aware of the church's financial needs, and that came in with a mean score of 2.3, which is in the triage range. And then I am aware of how the church spends its money, again, 1.9 in the triage range. And while most people in churches, and particularly in larger churches, don't care to see and know, and don't feel a need to see and know how every dime and all is spent, yet an awareness of what the church might need in the way of financial support, and certainly a confidence that the church is spending the money wisely, are very, very important communication issues that impact morale, impact financial stewardship, and sometimes impact volunteer involvement as well. And so prescription number 4 is to develop and implement a comprehensive system for communication by July 1 of 2017. The next issue is staffing. For a church your size, in most instances, I would be telling you you are marginally overstaffed. But in your instance, you are likely understaffed. And the reason for that is that you're running about 300, a little bit over that perhaps, in terms of worship attendance, and you're already multi-site. At most multi-site churches, and before a church goes to multi-site, most of them are about twice your size. Now, that doesn't mean that you made a mistake by going multi-site. The reality is that you did need to do it in order to continue to grow. But the fact of the matter is then that you don't have the mass of people, and this goes back to the volunteer staff as well as paid staff. It goes back to that issue again that we talked about in your demographics. You're missing a generation of worker bees. And anytime that's true, then that raises up the need for paid staff. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean full-time paid staff. It can be stipend staff. It can be part-time staff. And it can be, in certain instances, a full-time staff position that is needed in order to provide the leadership that is required at that particular time. So the reality is you're already growing, and you have a desire to reach still more people for Jesus, and you have some momentum, some growth momentum. Now, one of the fundamental principles of church life and ministry is that wise churches staff for growth. They don't wait for their growth to prove the need for additional staff. They hire on the front end, not on the back end of growth. So when you factor in the demographics that we've talked about, the incredible success that you're having in reaching young families, which is increasing the percentage of children as compared to adults, when you begin to factor all of that stuff in together, it really leads us to say that you need more staffing at this point rather than less. Now, again, having said that, healthy growing churches are always primarily staffed by volunteers. I've said many, many times over the years, I never cease to be amazed at how willing some people are to pay someone to rob them of the privilege of ministry. Any church that has a mentality that if there's a need, that the first thing you do is go out and hire more staff, that's a real problem, and an attitude that is going to have a very negative impact in the life of the church. But volunteer staff needs a certain number of paid staff people in order to function most effectively. It just needs someone that has if not a full-time, at least a very specific responsibility for coordinating and empowering the volunteers. Now, this raises the issue then that not only with your current staff, but especially any staff that you add at any level, stipend, part-time, or full-time, must be team builders and empowering leaders of ministry leaders. You're at a size now where you cannot hire people who have expertise to do a certain kind of ministry, because the ministry needs to be done by lay volunteers. But you need someone who has the capability and the knowledge and the background and the ability to be able to build a team and empower the leaders of that team and the teams to carry on the ministry in the future. So that leads us then to prescription number 5, to create and begin implementing a plan for staff expansion and alignment. And the alignment is to the mission and vision. So the envisioning process has to happen before we can get to this one. For those of you that might be familiar with Collins' book, Good to Great, he talks about identifying the right seats on the bus. That's about staff architecture. It's about staff positions that you have, making sure that the positions you have are not the positions that you needed in the past, but the positions you need now, and especially the positions that you will need in the future, if you are going to be able to absorb whatever growth God brings to you in the future. So it begins this whole process of alignment, and deciding what areas of staff expansion might be needed. Starts with identifying the right seats on the bus. And then it moves to getting the right people in the right seats, and that might mean making some adjustments to existing staff roles, moving them into either position descriptions that are for the future, and really do contribute to the accomplishment of the mission and vision. And then once you've done that, then you take a look at what seats remain to be filled, and that would be the expansion piece of this prescription, and take a look at what may need to be added in the way of staff leadership in order to fully coordinate and empower the volunteer leaders to do the work of the ministry. And the time frame that we put on this is by the end of the second quarter of 2017. Now, when it comes to facilities, you probably recognize this, Family Feud, and the great line, of course, is the survey says. And so what does the survey say relative to facilities? Well, you're already multi-site, and that's obvious to everybody. And so you have Deer Meadow and Crossroads. And the reality is, and let's see, I need to make a change here for a second. So you have the two campuses at the present time. When it comes to the Crossroads facility, some of you want to just continue as is, which really is not an option. Something has to be done. Others want to remodel or add on to the Crossroads site, which may or may not even be possible. And others want actually new construction at the Crossroads site, which my guess is without expanding the land there, and how much land you have is an impossibility, for a variety of reasons. But you have all, at various points on the survey and in listening to people in the focus groups, you have all of these attitudes just relative to, and thoughts, different approaches, just relative to the Crossroads campus. And then when it comes to Deer Meadow, there's a recognition on the part of many that this is not a long-term solution. But for some, it's just ride the pony till it dies and don't worry about it and kind of until it does. But there's also a number of you that were already anticipating the fact that riding the pony till it dies and worrying about it then is not really a wise thing to do. You're understanding and recognizing that really it's not Deer Meadow that's the issue, that the long-term future of Bethel is Crossroads and Greencastle, somewhere in Greencastle. So they're recognizing then that Deer Meadow is an interim thing until God enables you to either buy an existing facility and remodel it for your use, or buy land and build. And so as you look at this thing, this is a pretty pretty diverse viewpoints and positions and preferences and all. And the reality is they are all represented in your congregation. So the survey basically says that generally speaking, you're not thinking with one mind relative to facilities. So everybody knows you have a facility problem, but there's no agreement about how to solve it. Now, Next Step has no emotional investment in this addressing of the facility needs, except to see Bethel accomplish all that God has in mind for it to do. And so, as we move into some observations and move you toward a prescription here, there's a pretty good chance I'm going to be an equal opportunity offender. With so many different opinions about what should be done, probably somewhere along the line I'm going to say something that will not mesh with many of your preconceived ideas about how the facility needs should be addressed. So here would be our observations. There is a long-term future for ministry at the Crossroads campus. It does not seem wise to us at all that campus would be abandoned for just a whole host of reasons. Certainly worship at the Crossroads campus for the foreseeable future, and by that I don't mean short-term foreseeable future. We're thinking long-term. There needs to be, if you're going to have worship, some children's ministry. Certainly the Crossroads campus can house certain aspects of the youth ministry. It's probably not suitable to house it all, and probably in the wrong location for many youth, in that they're not, particularly if they are living in Greencastle or on the far side of Greencastle, it's not likely that they would come if everything were held at Crossroads. But yet there no doubt are certain aspects of the youth ministry that can and should be done at the Crossroads campus. Meeting space, perhaps office space, although the reality is that maybe you need to move offices out at some point in the future in order to have more meeting space, usable meeting space at the Crossroads campus to actually house some of the ministries that you would continue to run there. So when it comes to the Crossroads campus, the configuration of the campuses and the nuances of the future use will be somewhat different from the past. But the site, we believe, should certainly, and will remain an important and relatively inexpensive part of Bethel's ministry. And that's one of the great things is you have some very good space, not all ideal, particularly downstairs, but you have good space. But the reality is that it doesn't cost much for all of that square footage that houses a great deal of ministry and should continue to house a good deal of ministry in the future as well. The next observation we would make is that Bethel's growth opportunity is Greencastle, not Crossroads. Wise fishermen fish where the fish are. And you pretty well have fished out the pond at Crossroads. And obviously you just have a much greater population and a much greater pond in which to fish at Greencastle than you do at Crossroads. So what we're saying then is that Crossroads definitely has a future, but it's not your future. Deer Meadow is arguably the best current option for Bethel in the Greencastle area. You want to thank God for its availability. You want to trust Him to provide it for as long as you need it. But Deer Meadow is not your long-term solution. So it's our belief that owning a ministry site and facility in the Greencastle area is essential for predictability, stability, and sustainability. And if that's true, and we firmly believe that it is, you must start addressing this now, not if or when Deer Meadow is no longer available to you. And so purchasing an existing facility is potentially an option, but probably not your best solution. It's an option, but not necessarily your best option. the location may not be ideal. Um, the suitability of the space, a building that might be too small for you, and in terms of space for worship or space for children's ministry and youth ministry or whatever. And so it's not something that we think it would be wise for you to rule out, but it would really take a very special location to be the right place and be the right kind of facility, or one that could be remodeled to meet the needs, the ministry needs of the church in the future. So our belief is that the optimum solution is finding the right available location, and that would be the right location. And largely what we're thinking on that part is somewhere between Greencastle proper and the Crossroads campus, rather than on the far side of Greencastle compared to the Crossroads location. And then building new to your current and future ministry needs. And we believe that that's the optimum solution to your facility needs moving forward. Now, that brings us then to finances, and particularly as they're related to the facility, because no matter what you decide to do, and no matter what possibilities God might bring your way, it's going to cost money. For you to buy and to build anything, even a first phase of what you might need for the future in proximity to Greencastle, probably going to cost in excess of $2 million. It could even be, when you get looking at it, could even be in excess of maybe even $3 million, but certainly $2 million. The other part of it is, too, you have the facility needs, but you're also going to have growing staffing needs. And adding staff always costs money, even if it's a stipend position or a part-time position. And certainly if it's a full-time position, it costs money. And though part-time staff is less expensive, it still takes money. And so you have this confluence of financial needs, the facilities, staff, and growing ministry, which also will require some growing funding in order to support it. And so that leads us to the sixth prescription, which is to engage professional help to coach you in conducting a ministry expansion campaign to be launched no later than second quarter 2017. There might be reasons either to do it sooner than that or maybe a bit later, but at least at this point, start kind of thinking and targeting that by end of second quarter, that you would be into a ministry expansion campaign. Now, notice we're using the language ministry expansion campaign as opposed to a capital campaign, because even though a significant part of it would be used for capital improvements, the reality also is that you're going to need to figure out how to fund the additional ministry expenses, whether they are staff expenses or actual direct ministry cost expenses. The need to address those, the right language to use to describe the kind of financial campaign that you need is not just a capital expansion or capital campaign, but a ministry expansion campaign, which a significant part of it is, of course, capital improvement. Prescription number 7, let me give it to you and then talk with you a little bit about it. Think, talk, and pray over these prescriptions and vote to accept them and pursue them no later than November 15th, 2016. First thing we would say is that we would urge you to not view this as a buffet and pick and choose what you want. I don't go to buffets anymore because I know that if I go to a buffet, I'm going to make all the wrong choices. I'm not going to eat the things that I should eat, and I'm going to eat a whole bunch of things that I shouldn't. And it works kind of the same way with prescriptions. A lot of times the very prescription that you might feel the most resistant toward following through on is maybe even the most important of all the prescriptions. And then the other part is that they're interrelated. And if you do two or three of them but don't do all of them, you will not even get the full benefit of the two or three that you do. And so we're really encouraging you to look at these prescriptions, the first 6 prescriptions, as in essence an all or none kind of thing. Now, I know that in your polity, your leaders make these decisions. Your pastor and your board make these kinds of decisions, and in a very real sense, it's their vote. And I think they certainly need to think, talk, and pray over these things, and then come to you with their recommendation. But it would be good for you as a congregation to say to them and to register your support, hopefully your support, for their position in terms of adopting these prescriptions in order to be able to move ahead as a church. Well, my last slide, I love it. I didn't get it. Could you go over that again? Nobody, including me, wants to start again at the beginning. But hopefully this presentation will be helpful to you as you think, pray, and talk together about moving ahead and seeking to follow God's leading.